Upon further inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast goes beyond the data and dives into the people, challenges, and stories behind reliability and inspection. Whether you're in the field or in the office, this podcast is for you because mechanical integrity isn't about assets, it's about the people who keep them running. You're listening to episode 4, Gotta Document the Logic, discussion on RBI. So as usual, I'm here with Greg Alvarado. I'm Branden Stucky. How's it going, Greg?
It's going great, Branden. How are you doing, buddy?
I am doing wonderful today. I'm doing just fantastic. So today I wanted to kind of pick your brain and hear a little bit from you and kind of discuss with you the concepts of qualitative RBI versus the concept of quantitative RBI. Obviously, when you look at the word quantitative, meaning number, we don't quite have that in the qualitative version. Why do we even have why do we even have this difference? Why is this a thing right now?
Well, to put things in proper context, we go back to the beginning of this project, that is the API 581 RBI project, I should state. We really didn't know exactly where we were going to end up or how it was going to go. We actually thought RBI would all be done on spreadsheets or graph paper or something. And of course, at the time, DNV was the prime contractor, and all the other members at API user group were users of the technology. So anyway, we began developing those risk management tools, and we saw that the more quantitative we got, in other words, the more data hungry we got, the more actual go get the data, the more confidence we felt in the calculations. But we also had to look at the models and how much accuracy we wanted to achieve in the answers. And initially, and again, I'm just using the API project as an example, we actually created what we call a qualitative RBI and what we called at the time a semi-quantitative RBI. And just real quick, Branden, then I'll let you ask me some more questions. But on the qualitative RBI, we ask things, we wouldn't ask like what temperature does it operate at? We'd ask them to pick from a list what of ranges of temperatures that a piece of equipment might operate in. Instead of asking for certain specific numbers and information, we'd ask for more qualitative or general types of information. And we felt like we were kind of feeling our way in the dark. And then we began developing more quantitative models. But in actuality, I'm glad we're having this discussion because I actually juxtaposed them. We started out with a more quantitative approach. And then the group wanted to back off on the quantitative approach because of perceived level of effort to do it, to go to a qualitative approach. What I think gave us an advantage at that time to develop a qualitative approach is that the quantitative approach, in doing that, we came up with calculations where we felt like there was very little uncertainty, so to speak. We understood a lot about what was going on. There wasn't a lot of guesswork. So that when we popped back to a qualitative way to do it, we said, okay, what are reasonable cutoff ranges of temperatures, pressures, and other types of things, metallurgies? How specific do we really need to be? And after a while, we figured out, and as technology and computers continued to develop, that we could definitely become more quantitative. And we felt like that was going to bring a bigger payback, that it would also make it a more systematic and reproducible and consistent process, as we became more quantitative. But we realized we didn't want to become so quantitative and coming up with a method to prioritize inspections with that it became impractical to do. So that's
What?
kind of how we started.
Yeah. What's the time frame of this, just for the listeners? What was the time frame of when all this happened? Because it's been a little while, and some of the things that you're talking about might be perceived differently. So what was the time frame here of all this starting?
Yeah, this started in the early 90s, like 91, 92. We were doing a lot of little pilot projects, proofs of concept along the way at different refineries. There was a user group that was made up of only owner operators. And then in about, I don't know, 93, we realized we couldn't do this on paper. It was going to need to be done by computers. And then in about, I don't know, 94, 95, we started getting a better handle on the semi-quantitative versus qualitative thing. So, you know, we had a we had now abandoned in 581 the old qualitative approach by the late 80s, or excuse me, the late 90s. And we're moving more toward just what we call the level two approach, which then morphed in the late 90s into what people see now when they use the 581 software, or at least more toward that.
Yeah, so you talk about software, right? So the original qualitative method, the point was to try and make a hand calc. Now technology is a lot better than it was. It's advanced a ton since then. Do you, if you were to have done this again, if API were to have started this whole JIP now, how do you think it would be different? Do you think we would be further than we are now in just that short period of time? Do you think that we would be leveraging AI or other types of concepts now? Or do you think that the committee still would have started out with trying to do a hand calc type model?
I I don't think it's a either or answer. I think if we started now, I mean, I don't know if we looked at where we were back in 1990 in inspection programs and worked up until now. I think the industry would have been okay if the industry would have started doing damage mechanisms reviews without even having RBI yet. Because that was one of the big benefits that RBI brought is it forces the practitioner to do a systematic damage mechanisms review and understand the damage better. Where is it going to be? What's it going to look like? What kind of NDE technique should I use? Prior to the early 90s, honest, in my impression, there were some people doing that, but not a lot of people. And there were other side benefits, right? It's kind of like the NASA space program. If you look back, to the 60s and all the work that was done there were some other benefits that came out of it than just landed on the moon, right? Landing on the moon. There were microwave ovens. There were a lot of other technologies that happened, good things that happened along the way. And so with RBI, it caused us to become more systematic, quit taking a lot of shortcuts, not as much of this. But the important thing is that using risk, it showed us where we really needed to be more accurate and where we could zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, and some of those side things, right? The side benefits that came out of this, those are things like damage mechanism reviews. Those weren't those specifically coming out of the Chevron failure. And more recently, we're seeing documents around corrosion control documents, CCDs, and IOWs, integrity operating windows. So, yeah, I think if we look back, whether it's the qualitative or the quantitative method of RBI, as you said, the systematic method has been put in place to be able to help progress the industry, not just in risk analysis, but in overall documentation and identification of potential failure modes. I think that's pretty easy to see. So.
Yes, yes. And the other thing it's caused us to do in the process is to document things. Okay, if you measured 5 mils per year corrosion rate on this piece of equipment, how come you've got a 6 mil per year corrosion rate in the RBI program? If you're going to do something out of the way, document it so that people can understand your logic. Got to document the logic. And I think the industry's still working hard on that. I think we still have a long way to go. But yeah.
Yeah, right. And to documentation, right? There's plenty of softwares out there now that help support with that documentation. And in the past, it wasn't a thing, right? There's a whole new industry, software industry that's been developed specifically to facilitate this, not just at the ERP level, but all the way down at the actual inspection level and being able to provide those audit trails. So, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, qualitative versus quantitative, I don't think it really matters when you look big picture wise, the benefits that have come out of just this one single JIP, I mean, they continue to keep bearing fruit.
I
So,
agree. Yeah, and I think another big benefit of becoming more quantitative is we now have metrics to help us get better. So as we get smarter, as our technology improves as far as computers and software and all these things, we're getting smarter, we're able to crunch more numbers. But to go back to your original question, what if we just started today? So we have AI today, and I just started out with like EMRs. Of course, IOWs are a part of that. And the other thing is piping circuitization. Years ago, they called it piping circuitization, but it was just P and ID line numbers. And then that grew into a circuitization as we began to appreciate the thermodynamics of damage mechanisms, what causes them. And so then we started going into circuitization, and this was the RBI process was driving all this. The only other thing that could have driven this is in my opinion, is if an owner operator would have had one of these other systems or complementary systems, like you're talking about a inspection database management system or an IDMS, is if I don't have RBI, but I've done a DMR, and now I've identified my corrosion circuits, which are supposed to be groups of piping of pretty much the same damage mechanisms, damage rates, so forth and so on materials. If I do that, then let's say I don't have RBI and I've got my IDMS, and my IDMS is saying, oh, on this TML, on this circuit or CML, it's 6 mils per year. On this one, it's 5 mils per year. On this one, it's 6 mils. On this one, it's 9 mils per year. On this, but yet they're all part of that same circuit. And so a couple of the challenges the industry had been facing is, number one, people were thinking they could become more efficient without losing any effectiveness by using circuit average corrosion rates in these IDMS systems, and then managing that circuit based on the circuit average rate instead of each little individual TML rate. Does this make any sense? And that exists regardless of RBI. It's like what corrosion rate am I using? And it's also about how do I manage the work? How do I manage the system, right? How do I manage the work?
Yeah, it's interesting when you start thinking about how everything's progressed all the way through. Even there, you called them TMLs and switched up to calling them CMLs. All of this seems like it has stemmed not just from the inspection standards, but from the added pieces that we've been trying to do to make ourselves better. So, well, Greg, I want to thank you for your time today. We'll catch up again. We'll catch up again next time. All right.
Sounds great, Branden. Good
All
talking with you,
right.
buddy. Anytime.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Upon Further Inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast. This episode was co-created by Inspectioneering and Core Solutions. Our producers are Nick Schmoyer, Jocelyn Christie, and Jeremiah Wu. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. Listeners should seek their own qualified advisors for guidance. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us next time wherever you listen to your podcast. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.